Good afternoon and welcome once again to yet another webinar, part of the 2023 IHF Coaches and Referees Education Week, where leading experts throughout the world of handball share their knowledge and experience in 7 days. My name is Adrian Costeu. I'm a member of the IHF media team, and I will be your host during this week for 12 very interesting webinars. 7 of them are already elapsed. The next one is today. And we will touch, of course, interesting parts of the sport. To begin with, we would like to let you know that these webinars are all in English, but we have translations available in French, Spanish, and Arabic. Like in the previous webinars, you just need to get to the bottom of your Zoom app, click the interpretation icon, the globe icon there, and select your preferred language, of course. Only the persons entering the Zoom call can access these translations. All of these sessions, all of the webinars fall under the umbrella of the IHF Education Center, which is available at ihfeducation.ihf.info. And all the webinars are being recorded and are available on demand video on the website, so ihfeducation.ihf.info. Without further ado, I would like to present our panelists for today, our guest for today. It's Mr. Klaus Dalgaard Hansen. Hopefully I pronounced it correctly, the talent manager at the Norwegian Handball Federation, and his presentation will be the talent detection in light of changing playing styles. So Klaus, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And it was pronounced very, very nice.
Thank you very much.
So I will start here. Whoop. Yeah. I'm very grateful for the invitation to this webinar, and I am looking forward to present you some ideas and some experience I have had through a lot of years. I'm normally quite humble, but I will start to present myself. I am 51 years old, and I am a member of the IHF CCM expert group. I am also a IHF master coach, and I have made presentation and trainer courses throughout Europe. In the past, I have been a talent trainer in the Danish Handball Federation for several years, from 2002 to 2008. Then I became a youth national coach on the male side, and was there in Denmark for 10 years, from 2008 to 2018. In the same period, I also was head of talent development on the male side. Then I've been a club coach in Skjern Håndbold from 2019 to 2022. Both assistant coach, head coach, and head of talent development. And right now, I last year started as head of talent development in Norway, and I function there also on male side. This is a little opening too. I have been working the past 20 years with a lot of very, very skillful players. I have had 9 youth tournaments, both European and world championships, and I have also been a part of the coaching staff on the men's team, of course, topped with the gold in Rio in 2016. But that's not my main issue. I think what I prefer to work with is young players and long-term athlete development, trying to make paths for as many different players as I can in order to give them good chances to become top players. This is my agenda for today. First of all, I would try to talk a little about talent development from my point of view. Then I will move on to talent identification in handball, because we have to be specific. Then I will look into what Denmark did or have done, and I will go back to 2008, 2009, and work from there. Then I will look at what are we up against. I think it's important that we also look on the different playing styles in handball. How does handball develop? How does the rule changes affect the way of playing handball? And then I will, in the end, talk a little about what are the traps, what is important that we look at when we work with young players, work with talent development, and try to make as many of them as good as possible. And then in the end, I hope that there are some questions so we could get a little dialogue there. And don't hesitate. I think it's important to share knowledge. And it's not that I know everything. This is just a presentation to give you an insight of primary Danish handball. It is important for me to say at that point that I know that Danish handball is very privileged. We have a lot of players, which makes it easier also to pick out players. And I know that it's not the same in a lot of countries, but I still think that there are some issues here, some reflections that you can make. First of all, what is talent development? I have spent a lot of time looking into research, talking to researchers, trying to be wiser in that point to help me when I'm working with young players. One of the researchers I have worked mostly with and I'm very inspired of is a Danish scientist called Kristoffer Henriksen, and he is saying talent development in sport is an ongoing mutual adjustment between a young athlete and a dynamic and complex environment, both in and outside the sport. What I think is very important to highlight here is that we need to look not only at the athlete, but we also have to look around the athlete. We have to make an environment where they can grow, and therefore we also need to look at their education. We also need to look at their background, what is happening in school, what are the involvement of the family and the parents, because we have to make human beings and players that are able to work in a internationalized sports environment where you can change club, change continents, meet different kind of coaching, meet different cultures. So it's not only passing and catching, there are a lot of other stuff. In my opinion, the role of the coach in talent development is quite another than the coach's role having the biggest senior teams. In senior teams at top professional level, it's about winning, and every match should be won. Otherwise, you have the risk of getting sacked and have to find a new job. But in talent development, I think it's quite important that our decisions is always in the favor of the player. And at that point, I consider myself as a catalyst for young, ambitious athletes. The players, they come to me in a certain age. I can try to help them. I can try to work with them. I can develop them. But I think it is important that it's not my career that it's about. It's the player's career, and I love to be acknowledged of that. So every decision I make have to be in favor of the athlete, and sometimes it can make the coach as working with young players maybe sometimes is lacking acknowledge and praise because most of the talk is about the senior players. But I think it has to be like that because it is important that the players are in the center of the development. And as I just mentioned, it should not be in favor of me or my career or the organization. The center should be the athlete so that they can go on and we can make a sport with better players. I move forward to talent identification. I have been lucky to have been working with a lot of good Danish players. I have been working with a lot of youth national teams. And to quote Socrates for more than 2,000 years ago, my experience is, all I know is that I know nothing. Because my experience is that it is very, very unpredictable who will be the best players in the end. Still, in a Danish context or Scandinavian context where you have a lot of players. But there's a picture of 4 players here. It could be some others, but a player like Mikkel Hansen was a quite little guy, a skinny guy when I met him the first time when he was 15, 16 years old. But he was a very clever player, and he worked very hard, being good with his technique and his tactics. And then all of a sudden, when he was 17, 18 years old, he grew very fast, and then he had the whole package. Then he had the physique, and then he also had a very excellent shooting arm and a very clever handball head. But when the youth national team in Denmark in his generation started, there was players at left back who was better than him. The next example is Kevin Møller, who is now playing in Flensborg Handewitt. He came from a very little club in Denmark and went to a high school with a lot of handball. But he was in a generation with both Jannik Gren and Niklas Landin. So he almost didn't play on the Danish youth national team. And the first 4 years when he was a senior, he was not playing in the best league. And his history is highlighting some crucial things in a sport like handball, because the players need to have patience. In handball, you have a lot of time becoming better, a lot of time to improve, because a lot of the best players, they are around 30, 35. So even though you haven't reached the highest level when you are 19, 20, 21, 22, then it's important for us to keep motivating the players to give it a chance more, because they have a chance if they continue working, because you don't need to peak when you are 17, 18, and you have the chance to have a very long career. Jakob Holm from Füchse Berlin is the next example. I had his generation on the youth national team, and he had very strong individual. What can you say? He is very strong on his individual things, going 1-against-1, shooting. But maybe when he was younger, a little hard to play with, because he was he really wanted to end all the things. But the good thing about Jakob was that he was keeping up with his own style of playing, and he got the weapons that are so important in male handball, shooting, going 1-against-1. And if he had been more a team player at that time, I'm not sure that he had the development on such fine weapons. The last one is Mathias Gissel. And the thing with both Jakob Holm and Mathias Gissel is that they were not playing under 18 European championships in their generation. Jakob is born 95, Gissel is born 99, and there's a huge difference when you are 16, 17, 18 years old, if you are born early in a generation or late in a generation. Sometimes it can be an advantage to be a little older and be more mature. But what we did in Denmark at that time was that when we had played the under 18 national European championship, we changed a lot of players, and it made a space for both Jakob and for Mathias. And that means that they got a chance to get international experience, but also a chance to get motivated. And I think it's important when you have enough players that you motivate a lot of players, and you give a lot of players at that age a chance to develop also through playing international matches. So what is important is that when we look at players at maybe also 13, 14, 15, the only thing we can see when we are going into a talent detection is their current level. When we look at them having practice, look at them playing matches, that is the only thing we can see. And sometimes we have to be aware and to stay humble about that. And it's very difficult, because when you are only able to see the current level, you can't say anything about what will happen in the upcoming years. So we need to have many players getting or staying motivated when we work with talent development, because when you look at a player at 14 years old, some of them, they are matured like they were 17. You look almost at a grown-up man with a beard and a deep voice. But a player could also be 14 and physically only be 11. And you look at a little guy with a tiny voice and with tiny legs and tiny biceps. But what is important, going back to the other picture from before, both Mikkel Hansen and Mathias Gissel, they were very late matured. So we need to have patience when we pick out the players so that we both stimulate the players that are good right now, but also give a chance to them who will come later. Who made it? Is a little investigation I made last autumn in the month up to the World Championships in 2023. My work the last many years, both for Denmark and now for Norway, was not to win youth national medals. It was to develop players who could go into the men's national team and hopefully also with a level that can compete for the medals in the big tournaments. This means that it's very interesting for me to look back and try to see, are there any characteristics of the players who made it from youth national team to men's senior team. And because I was a part of the Danish team from under 18 European Championships in 2012 in Austria, as a head coach, I had some data and some material who made it possible to try to see who was both in Austria and in Sweden or Poland, or who was not in Austria but still made it to Sweden or Poland. And in my opinion, there are some interesting details that we need to take into consideration and learn from. 10 nations were both in Austria 2012 and Sweden, Poland 2023. 57 players from the 10 nations born 1994, 1995 was nominated for their team for the World Cup, World Championships 2023. What's interesting is that 33 of them did not participate in the under-18 European Championship in 2012. And some of them was not even among the 28 nominated for the European Championships in Austria. For example, Jakob Holm from Denmark, Sigvaldi Gudjonsson from Iceland, Göran Johannessen from Norway, Kukic from Serbia, Imanol Garciendia from Spain, and Jonathan Karlsbogård from Sweden. So there we have very, very skillful players who at that time wasn't selected for their team, but still made it to highest international level when they become senior players. What is also interesting is that none of the top scorers from the 10 teams in Austria was playing at the World Championships 2003, and it's not that it's all about making goals, but it's still interesting that none of them who was that dominating on their team when they were 17, 18 years old made it to the World Championships later on. Another thing that I have already mentioned a little is the things about born 95 or 94. 118 of the players from the 10 teams who were both in Austria and Sweden, Poland, was born in 1994. 40 was born in 1995. This again highlights the big issue regarding relative age effect, the thing that the way we construct our tournament may have an impact of the possibilities of the players going into the tournaments. When you look at it from the helicopter, you will say that, of course, there are as much talent in 94 as in 95, but you can see that the gap between the amount of players is very big. And I think that a lot of the players from the 118 players, they were further in their development than the players from 95. "29 of the 10 players who came into Sweden, Poland 10 or 11 years later was born in 1994. 28 was born in 1995. So when they become seniors, they become older. The youngest group of the 1995 players, they are keeping up the pace with the 1994 players, and there were almost as many players born in 1995 than in 1994. Research in Denmark says that if you come into a youth national team and you play international matches born in, for example, 95, 97, or 99, the chance to get a space in the men's team later on is 7 times higher than the players born in 94, 96, 98. So a group of the oldest players that are best in the beginning have a hard time going into the men's national team. And I think that we, in our talent management in this age group, has to be much aware of this issue and maybe even make quotes for the younger players, and also having in mind that the next best of the oldest players, in my opinion, very rare becomes the best in the end. I hope it makes sense, even though it is a little tricky with all these numbers and all these figures. But how come it is like that? I think we have all looked at players in 14, 15 years old, and there was a huge gap between them in what they were able to do on the court. But 5, 6 years later, it was a different thing. So how come it is so hard to predict who will become the best? In my opinion, we have to be aware of how we play and how what the court looks like. From my culture, the Scandinavian culture, from around 12, 13 years old, the players are playing the same game as you do when you become senior. The court is 20 times 40 meters. You play with 6 players in the field and a goalkeeper. But the thing is that the players becomes taller, and they also grow bigger. So the spaces in the court are becoming smaller and smaller when they become older. And it means that it is different kinds of weapons you can win matches with. Because the court is the same, but the players grow. And the spaces become smaller. This means the adult player has to have individual skills in both ends of the court, being able to defend a large area alone, but also in the other end, go 1 against 1 or shoot from a large distance. In my opinion, space is everything in modern international top handball because the players are so fast and so big. So if you don't have the weapons so that you can take a defender away and make space for the next one, or go 1 against 1 and pick the next defender, then it's very hard to create chances. Then it's an interesting question, in my opinion. Is it enough to be clever? I don't think so. But I think that it's an advantage. But it's also not enough to be a good shooter if you are not able to work with tactics, work with the line player. But I think it's getting more and more important that the players need some weapons so that they can be a threat to the defense. So these are the players we have to look for, and these are the players we need to develop. And what does that mean when we go more specific? What do I look at? And as I mentioned earlier, I don't say that this is the only way of doing it, but it's the way I'm doing it through my classes. And it's, of course, built on a lot of experience working with a lot of players the last years. And this says 14 to 19. I think you could maybe even go a little younger or a little older, because the development should continue. Performance, what are they showing on court right now? How important is it really when we pick the players? I think as younger the players are, the performance they are showing, their current level, should mean less. Of course, when you go up to 18, 19, even 20, the performance has been growing. They have become better. So you have to look more and more into current level. But when they are younger, I don't think it should mean that much. What I think it is important we look at when we detect players is, do they shine from physique or technique? In the end, physique is very, very important in modern handball. But in talent development, I have seen a lot of players with a great technique, working with great technique, as I mentioned, with Mikkel Hansen or Mathias Gissel, who becomes stronger later, and then being able to have both technique and physique, and that is the whole package. Because even though Mathias Gidsel is very fast and extremely flexible, we also need to remember that he's not small. He's 190, weighing 93 kilos. But in my opinion, his advantage was that he grew late and he matured late, so he needed the technique to be able to compete with the others. Another thing is that if I am looking at players at 14 or 15 years old who shine from physique, then I am sometimes in doubt if they will make it in the long run, because sometimes the players with a big early physique, they are only used to work with the physique. This means some of them are maybe playing left back and having a lot of shots, but when they become older and they might not have other weapons than shooting, not being able to work with the line player, not being able to work with the winger, maybe not even able to work good in defense, then a lot of players will go ahead of them because they have more colors, more things to put into the team. So I think when we are having young, early matured players, it's a crucial task for the coach to challenge them to try to build new facets of their playing style so that they will also have a chance to compete with the best when they become older. Working with movements, working one against one, working with passing technique, and not only using the things that they are best at right now. I think potential is a very important factor in a sport where the best players are quite old compared to other sports. The potential is, for me, what is left. What can we build on this player? How good can he or she become? Some players, when they are 16, 17 years old, have maybe played handball for 8, 9, 10 years. And they have a lot of practice. And then we have to compare them with other players who maybe only played handball for 2 or 3 years. And we need to take that into consideration. And I do it when I look at them and maybe pick some for a national camp. Because what is the player's history? We need to be curious. Are they good because they have practiced much more than the others? Maybe. It should not be a disadvantage. But if a player comes later into handball but has played other sports, then we need to give him or she a bigger chance to stay in handball, because there might be something we can dig up later than from the other players. I mentioned relative age effect one time before, but for me it's a huge potential for handball. When I've been to so many youth national team tournaments and have seen so many of the small players becoming very good at a late point, and I have seen a lot of the early matured struggling to get the highest level, then I think it's so important that we try to look into the players' physical development in order to develop more players, in order to make our sport more attractive. And then for me, potential that is very important is the ability to adapt information. And therefore, the best hours I have with young players is when I have the chance to have a practice with them, because in that situation, it is much easier to try to find out if they have an ability to understand the game, to understand and adapt my information or other coaches' information. The game handball is so fascinating, and one of the fascination points from my side is how complex it is in different situations. And you need players that on the highest level in a timeout, 20 seconds before the end, is able to consume a lot of information and therefore are able to do the right things at the right moment with other players. And there I see it sometimes when I work with players and maybe trying to the right back to say, you need to work more outside when you go 1 against 1. And then he goes inside once more. Then maybe he misunderstood me, or he thought it was a better chance. But when he continued doing the opposite of my feedback, then I am in doubt, or I have a risk for his potential, because it's so important to be able to do different stuff. Next chapter. Hope you are still with me. Build on success. Here we have two famous Danish coaches, Jan Pytlik and Ulrik Wilbek. And when I say build on success, it means that in 2008, Denmark had settled as a very good female nation, but the men's tradition was not as strong. There was some medals in the beginning of this century. Torben Winther started it, but even though Denmark in 2008 was quite successful, then these two gentlemen looked at each other and said, but we still need some other types in our game. And what they thought was important to raise Danish handball to the next level was we need individualists and better defense players. They were both very much aware that it was strong groups of players that was doing the stuff. You can say earlier on the women's side, there was Anja Andersen and Camilla Andersen, who was very good individualists, but they thought at this point that we were missing them, and thought, what can we do about that? The thing they came up with in season 2008-2009, and what I think plays a huge part of the Danish success the last 15 years, is that man-man marking was prohibited in all youth handball. Pytlik and Wilbek thought that if we should be able to create better individualists, then we needed to give them a chance to play handball. And in many youth handball matches in Denmark, you saw the best players in the middle of the court with a man-man marking. So it was prohibited, and it had, in my opinion, two good side effects. The first was that we got more individualists, that the best players also was allowed to show what they were made of and was able to develop their game. But the other thing was that we saw more offensive defense and more 3-2-1, more 5-1, and not only 6-0, which is, as you all know, probably the main defense system in Scandinavian handball. The next thing was no substitution between defense and attack. So it became only legal to change players when your team got the ball. And it was a kind of cultural leadership from the two gentlemen's side in order to show the players and the coaches we need to work more with defense, and we need to take into consideration that we have to acknowledge the best defense players more, because then we might get better handball players in the end. At the same time, we began to make the youth national teams role models for these rule changes, because it was allowed both to go in man-man marking in youth handball in international matches, but also allowed, and still is allowed, to make substitutions between defense and attack. But at under 18 and under 19 on the men's side, under 18 we didn't at all change players from defense to attack. And we started in the end of under 19 to do it a little, to show the players, if they wanted to be a part of the youth national team, they also had to work with their qualities in defense. But it is no secret. It was also to show the club coaches that we meant that it was a good idea, because there was some criticism at that point, and therefore it was important that we, from the youth national team side, showed that this is so important, and we think it's such a good idea that even though we are allowed to change, we won't do it, because we think that is the best for the players and for Danish handball. I think I go back. I forgot one thing. The thing about the best defense players is, in a Danish context, that they have almost everyone been or are still very good attacking players. I sometimes think that we underestimate how clever in handball the best defense players are. Sometimes we believe that they are just big guys who will knock down the others. But I can see that in terms of Danish handball, very good defense players like Kasper Nielsen, Joachim Boldsen, Lars Jørgensen, and now Henrik Mølgaard, they are all so very good in attack, but they became specialists in the other end, also because that they were clever on the game, and they had a chance to see, will he cross, will he go on his own, will he play the line player, or what will he do? So I think it's important that we recognize that the best defense players are not robots. They are very clever and very skillful handball players. And it could even be an injury who made them to decide that they had to be in defense. When we came a little later in our strategy of recruitment in Danish handball, we found 3 key factors that we thought we would make our detection from. We would try to look more into individual skills. As I mentioned briefly earlier, we have a very collective way of playing handball, and we like to play with many passes, and we like to play with a great group tactics, but we need the players with the individual skills. So we try to look more from them and give them better chance, give them the time to fit in to the team, where, for example, Jakob Holm would be a very good example of that kind of player, but also Michael Damgaard. Then we were going way more into two-way players, meaning players that are able to work in both ends. We thought that it would that our teams in the long run would benefit from players who were able to work in both ends, so we could make even more pressure in our counter movement when we play our fast breaks, and also not giving the other teams the chance of making easy goals when we were exchanging players. And then we looked at the other sides who we were competing with, and could see that we needed, generally in Danish handball physique, we needed more players with a little more height and some kilos more, in able to especially compete with France at that time, who were higher and stronger than we were. And in that way, I go further to what are we up against? What is international top handball? Because if we need to compete with the best teams in the world, we can't close the eyes for how demanding the game is physically. And therefore, I have some figures on that. Try to explain it. Height on positions. Top 4 teams from the European Championships back in 2016, the Olympic Games 2016, and the World Cup 2017. These are the blue figures. And I can see I have some 4 Danish words here. I'm very sorry. The fløje, that is wing players. And you can see the figures here. There are more wingers in 2016, 2017 from 184 centimeters and down than there are in 21 and 22. It is the same when you go in the next category from 185 to 189. But then something interesting, in my opinion, happens in that period, that the largest part of the wingers, they are now between 190 and 194. So the history of all the small wingers is not the same when we come into the next years or in the period where we are now. In my opinion, it is a reaction from the coaches, because a lot of teams began to put the line player out between defender number 1 and number 2. And this all of a sudden meant that in defense, the wingers needed to be stronger to work with the line player, not losing all the 1-against-1 situation. So I think that's why this thing changed. And it also means that they adapted, we in the sport adapted to a change of playing style. Strege, that is line players. And not much have happened there from 2016 to 2022. But one thing that is still the same is that in international handball, you very, very rare see line players under 190 working there because physique is so important. Backcourt players is the next one. This is also quite interesting because it seems like we have more players also on the line, also on the wingers, but also on the backcourt players who are around from 190 to 198. As you can see earlier, there was more players above 2 meters. There are not that many of them left right now. Maybe because the game is getting faster. Maybe because that the aggressive defense don't give the tallest players the chance to create their chances. It's just thesis that I have. You can on your own think what could be it. But in my opinion, one of the most important things we can see as a tendency the last years is that some of the smallest players are going out. I know Luc Stein. I know a lot of the other very, very great, attractive guys, but this is data from the top 4 teams on the international scene. Goalkeepers, quite a big range also on height, but still most from, you can say, above 190. I know physique is not only height, it's very, very complicated. There are so many things, but this was the issue that I took out to this presentation. We need to develop different types of players in all positions. As the figures just showed there are luckily need of many different types of handball players in different positions. And that's one of the, I think, most important things when we look into talent detection, when we are trying to develop new players. We have to take into consideration that handball as a game changes all the time. So we need different types on different positions in order to be able to cope with all the new things. Tactic changed. I just mentioned the line player between number 1 and number 2. Another change in tactics is the Mensa movement, where you go 1 against 1. Many teams use that right now, and it means that you need more 1 against 1 players, both in attack and defense. But we need then to have these players and to develop these kind of players. Then there has also been rule changes that we need to be aware of if we want to compete on the highest level. First, 7 against 6, that changed it. Some things in the game, I think we adapt more to it now, but it means that playing 7 against 6, that the wingers, they are staying mostly in the corner, and also that we need to develop more line players, and then the fast throw off came, and I think everyone is able to see that it has also changed a lot from the game. It has become faster. 7 against 6, in my opinion, made the game slower. The fast throw off makes it faster. It means, in my opinion, we need more players that are able to work in both ways. Some teams are able to change 2 players from defense to attack, but most teams are looking to minimize it and now only changing 1 player. So these rule changes also challenge our detection system and our ability to develop different kinds of players on different positions. From experience from Denmark that I have taken to Norway now is the draw principle, to be concrete now with the ability to work with different players in different positions. If we take Denmark today, you see some examples on left wing. Nikolaj Jakobsen has the ability to change a lot tactically from game to game or inside the same game, because Magnus Landin is able to defend number 2. He is able to defend in front, and in that way it gives the Danish team some chances to change the way they are defending, but also maybe to give some backcourt players who are very good in fast break a chance to stay on court. Emil Jakobsen has some other qualities, especially from the corner, and then you have Kasper U. Mortensen, who has another dynamic way of playing handball. And when we worked with 1994, 1995 youth national team, Magnus Landin is born 95. I have to admit now that Magnus Landin was not one of the 3-4 best on left wing at that time, but he was in Austria because we strategically at that point said we have a lot of right-handed backcourt players who have a hard time defending, to be honest. So we need to develop a left wing that are able to do that. And we tried to give Magnus Landin the opportunity to grow in that role. So that was strategically as a success. Also, when it comes to line players, it is important to have different types. Simon Hall is the very big defense player and also attacking player, with 2.3 and a lot above 100 kilos. And it's important to have that type as a coach. Simon Hall is a former left back, which is the same with a lot of the best Danish line players, that they have been backcourt players earlier on and not line players when they were young. An exception is Lukas Jørgensen, who is online there. But another thing about Simon Hall that and a lot of people make mistake about is that when he is tested in speed for 5 meter or 30 meters, when he was 17, 18 years old, he was one of the fastest. And he was faster than, for example, Mathias Gidsel, when we tested him some years later, when they were at the same age. Magnus Saustrup, also a former backcourt player. He was actually a playmaker almost into the time of the European Championship in his generation, 1996, 1997. So he has the ability of being very, very good with the ball and has a very good perception of what do the backcourt players need from me in different situations, because he himself has been a backcourt player. He's a little smaller than Simon Hall, but still a big, strong guy. Lukas Jørgensen, the new one, is also a big, strong guy, but he's a little smaller. But with the fast throw off, he's very good at running. And I think that is very important for the line players right now, that because of the fast throw off, they need to be in a good shape, but still strong and still heavy. And I'm impressed to see Lukas Jørgensen moving in that speed with 108 kilos. But it's just to show that it's a strategy, or has been a strategy for a lot of years, to detect different kind of players, so that right now Nikolaj Jakobsen has a chance to pick in the shelf in many different types, on many different positions. And I know that it's a privileged Scandinavian setting with a lot of players playing, a lot of people playing handball. I know we have to take that into consideration. Last one here, right back, Mathias Gidsel, Niklas Kirkelykke, Mads Hoxer, also different types. And I think, as Nikolaj Jakobsen also mentioned after the World Championship, that Niklas Kirkelykke played a very important role in the Danish team, to be able to defend number 2 instead of Mathias Gidsel, who has a very demanding playing style. And that means that once again, the coach is able to change tactics from game to game, or maybe even from minute to minute. The last thing here is I put up some traps that we need to be aware of when we are working with talent development and we are working to develop players to the highest international level, which is the topic today. I think it's crucial that development comes before result when we talk talent development and we talk young players, and also even when we talk youth national teams at youth national tournaments. So it's strategically, in my opinion, more important to have participation in youth national championships than winning the championship. The most important thing for the players is to be there and compete, to find out what is international handball, what do I need to adapt to in the coming period in order to become an international player. I have been wondering many times why there have been working so hard for results with 17, 18 year-old players instead of trying to build them to what it's all about, in my opinion, playing senior handball. I think it's important that the coaches are measured by other stuff than the results. It is important for me right now, as head of talent development in Norway, to tell the youth national coaches that are going into championships this summer that of course we want to try to win every game, but they are not measured by that. They should not be afraid of keeping their job, even though we make bad results. The important thing is that we work with the right players who have a chance to go to the highest level in 3, 4, 5, maybe 7 years. That is the important thing, that they help them and coach them. In Norway, we have also said that no one should participate in every youth championship. We have the chance of doing that because we have many players. I know not every country is able or are privileged to do this, but for us, it's important that especially the year when they become senior, they might have a chance to stay home, work with their club, work with their physique, because the physique is so important to become a good senior player. And if they play championships every summer, when do they have the time to build on the muscles that could make them compete later on, but also prevent them from getting injured? Then it's also important that we look into players born in October, November, and December. We need to look into the relative age effect. We need to work so that both generations, for example, 02 and 03, have a chance to compete, to get international challenge, but also the players born late in a year, that even though they are not at the same physical development, most of them are when they are under 03 or 02, but earlier on, 06, 07, it's so important that we give them a chance. Then we need to act as role models from the federation. We have to do what we preach. So when we are going out saying that we will work with this strategy give these players the chances, let others stay at home, then we have to do what we say. Otherwise, we will lose the chance of getting others to listen to what we say. That's it for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Klaus, for your presentation. It's been very, very interesting to see the Danish model applied and how Denmark did so good over the last decade and a half, let's say. We still have some questions for you, so I think we selected some of them. The first, starting with the start of your presentation, is how important is physical training for young players, and how does it fit in the training schedule? I mean, is it important also to do a physical training, or the basic DNA of handball, the tactical and technical part?
I think that the physical training is very important. Coming to Norway, I see a huge difference between Denmark and Norway. In Denmark, the culture is that the physical training is the beginning. It makes you able to go to the court afterwards to prevent to get injured. So in Denmark, when the players are 17, 18 years old, they work 3-4 times physical every week and 3-4 times in hall with the technical, tactical side. While in Norway, 2 or 3 times physical and maybe 6-7 times in hall. And I want there to be a better balance. But I think that even if when they are 11, 12, 13, 14 years old, we need to work with physics very broad. Handball is very complex. We need to move very fast, change direction, move to the left, get the ball from the right. So we need to work very much with the physics.
Thank you for answering this question. Another question is about the pool of players. We have countries which are not that big and do not have so many players in the younger age categories. Therefore, should they focus more on talent discovery and refine their process to be better and better?
I think I had also in a period worked for Great Britain up to the Olympics in 12. And I think some of the things they did could be copied in countries with a less amount of players. And I think the talent transfer is very important, that you might be able to pick athletes from other sports into handball, because it could be hard when there's not a culture for handball to get them started at 10. But maybe when they missed the chance of becoming a part of a talent system in a bigger sport, then they could change to handball when they were 15, 16 years old and still become good, because in handball there are so many years to develop.
Another question refers to the coaches of the senior team. You've mentioned Ulrik Kirkeli and Jan Pytlik for Denmark. Are they also part of the strategy and developing players, like all the Danish teams are playing the same way from the younger age categories to the big team, so that promotion of players to a bigger age category is seamless?
No. In Denmark, there are not the tradition that the federation says how you should play. It is much up to the single coach that he or she is able to develop the players like he would. But the culture around, for example, 6-0 or passing technique is very strong. So it just comes with the practice. But there are no strict guidelines in how to practice or how to play.
Okay. Another question is in regards with the man-to-man mark when Denmark, let's say, banned it in younger age categories. There was also an indication to not full press on the court, right? So no man-to-man marking on the court in the dying seconds of the game.
Yeah. So nothing from that was allowed, and it started 15 years ago. And I think that the experience has been very good. But now everybody, I think most of the people like it now. But there was quite a discussion when it was when it came up.
So in order to do great things, you also have to make sacrifices, right? Which are not basically liked by everybody. You have to think outside the box for a bit.
Exactly.
How important do you think is player development right now for emerging teams in the world? And how do you think player development has changed and will change in the future according to the changing of the rules like you've presented us?
I think that the most important thing is to get more children play handball, to meet handball. So the handball in school, which are working very good, could grow even more. I think that it's very important that we educate more coaches. And then I think most important at all, that the big handball nations, like the handball nations I am representing, needs to take more responsibility in developing world handball. I think, in my opinion, that both the IHF and the EHF is making a great job. But I think that the biggest handball countries, they could do more. Sending coaches out in other countries, or maybe even inviting coaches into their tradition. So I think that the greatest potential is that the countries with the broadest shoulders, they bear more in the handball in the coming years.
And one last question, Klaus. You've told us about integrating young players to the senior teams and managing their load also. Do you think there is a proper age or a necessary age to be part of the senior team, so that player can also be both experienced at his age, but also not too raw?
I think that it's, as I started, we need to make decisions that is in favor of the player. And I think too many players go into senior handball too early. Some of them get injured, but also they meet a game where they maybe have one competence that the coach needs, and then he's only working on that, and then he misses the development of other things. And then he doesn't become as good as he could. So I think we have to be very much aware the consequences of putting players into senior handball too early. The youth years will never come back, but you can have 20 years as a senior player. So we need to let the players stay young, work with players at their same age, and develop a lot of different competences.
Well, thank you very much for this presentation, for this webinar. It's been really enlightening, some of the things that you've presented here. We will conclude now this webinar, and we will wait for you tomorrow. Also, a 13 CEST and 15 CST for another 2 webinars in the 2023 IHF Coaches and Referees Education Week. Have a nice afternoon. Have a nice evening. Goodbye.
Thank you.